Coming up, a lot of big talk from one SEC school has prompted a pretty interesting response from another. We'll tell you all about it next here on SEC Country Live. Hello everybody, welcome to SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Adams. This is the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. And I gotta tell you, I think we have a pretty juicy way to start the show today. I'm actually kind of excited about that.
Yeah, I think so too. And obviously, teams getting on the field, we've been looking forward to it all week. So I got to tell you though, I was looking at the schedule today of when teams start spring practice. I'm glad it's like kind of tiered because it's like I don't want it to all come at one time. I want to kind of ease into this and we kind of get a little bit at a time.
Yeah, he's talking about the way in which the SEC teams start their spring practice. You kind of step your way into it, not everybody kind of going at once. By the way, also coming up later on today, after hearing what one coach said, I'm going to change my tune based on kind of what we talked about earlier in the week on something. We'll get to that coming up in just a minute. But for now, though, let me remind you that here on SEC Country Live, we pretty much do it the same way every day. It's our first and 10. It's all the big news happening around the Southeastern Conference here. And we'll start with item number 1 on our SEC Country Live first and 10 list. Now, by now, you know something we've talked a good bit about this week. There is a lot of big talk coming out of Texas A&M, and almost all of it's getting a lot of attention. Let me start with something that we saw early in the week. One of the A&M assistants, Tim Brewster, out there making his, I believe the kids call these the edits, the big posters of all the money that the guys that have been coached by Jimbo Fisher making the NFL, including defensive backs, averaging about $9 million a year, and Jalen Ramsey, who is one of the all-time great defensive backs to be coached by Jimbo Fisher, one of the top guys in college football, also responding to Tim Brewster on this, saying, he didn't teach me not one defensive back technique. You also saw the other tweet there for a moment when he was like, hey, basically not liking the idea of his likeness being used for this Texas A&M sort of edit, this sort of online image that's being used to sort of tout Texas A&M now. So that's sort of one example of Texas A&M trying to get a lot of attention, getting some of that attention maybe in a negative way from Jalen Ramsey there. But that's not the biggest example from this week alone in terms of Texas A&M generating some headlines, generating a lot of talk. Because you had Jimbo Fisher, the brand new Texas A&M coach. He's at an event, I believe it's the Texas A&M Chancellor, is that right?
Yeah,
we'll see the video. Who gives Jimbo Fisher, you're just going to watch this for yourself. Take a look at what Jimbo Fisher is given as a gift here.
We have sort of the same thing that we gave Kobe. It says here, Jimbo Fisher, head football coach, NCAA Division I Football National Championship, Texas A&M University. The only difference between Kobe's and yours is you get to fill in a date.
I hope I fill in a couple.
So Jimbo handles this terrifically. He handles this great, but the smile on his face there is so fake.
Yeah.
Because you got to think for a moment. Fisher's like, what is this guy doing? Does he know what this is going to do? What pressure it's going to put on me? I'm speaking as Jimbo Fisher. Attention it's going to get around college football. Does this empty suit have any idea of what he's doing to me by giving me this plaque? It's pretty clear that that's the look that Jimbo Fisher's wearing on his face.
Yeah, it's a fake nervous smile. It's like a yeah, good call. I'm not sure how this is going to be played when people start talking about this, but I didn't mind it. I thought that, like you said, Jimbo Fisher did a great job of kind of rolling with it. Got everybody laughing, everybody laughing in the room, in the audience, and kind of rolls off as not a big situation. Now, of course, when you get on Twitter, boy, every picture is of the plaque and of what they're talking about. Boy, he was already handed a national championship.
Yeah, so he's given a plaque that says national champions. You just have to go back and fill in the year. It's essentially a statement from Texas A&M that we know you're going to win one eventually. We just don't know what year it's going to be. Yeah. So here is where things start to get interesting. Because of all the noise that Texas A&M is making, eventually it was noticed by the University of Alabama and one of their brand new assistants in particular who tweeted this out. I don't think there's any way to interpret this other than kind of a shot towards Texas A&M. Josh Gaddis says, I've seen some fire recruiting graphics, but let me remind you, the one recruiting graphic that can never be duplicated, often imitated but never duplicated. There's some, hashtaggery or some emoji work there that would lead you to believe he's talking about the real national championship. Although I don't know what that emoji on the left even is. Nonetheless, it says hashtag Kings of Confetti, hashtag Roll Tide. Josh Gaddis' tweets about Texas A&M, right?
There's no doubt. Yeah, there's no doubt. Hashtag Kings of Confetti, like you said, and I think this is just in Alabama's way of kind of saying, hey, we're still on top of this thing. Other people can put out, whatever they want to about, getting DBs to the league or winning championships or doing what they got to. But Josh Gaddis, as a new member, remember Josh Gaddis wasn't there for the national title game, so he's kind of riding a little bit of a coattails, but just saying, we've got a lot of things going on for us too and headed in the right direction.
So I have a strong opinion on this. I think Texas A&M comes out a big winner in this entire ordeal.
Yeah.
Huge winner for a couple of reasons. A, this is another example of something that I think that you and I both try to operate on every single day, that Twitter criticism is not real life. What people say on Twitter is not real. And people are mocking the Texas A&M plaque left and right on social media, Facebook kind of the same way, Instagram, whatever medium you prefer. They're all going to mock this plaque. But you know what? It would be bad publicity if there was such a thing as bad publicity. The fact of the matter is all publicity is good publicity.
Yeah.
I think even the exchange between Tim Brewster and Jalen Ramsey, for the most part, is good for Texas A&M because it gets people talking about the Aggies. Even so much so that Josh Gaddis, a brand new coach at Alabama, relatively young coach, I think has been drawing off sides here. I think Texas A&M is drawing off sides. All of a sudden, Gaddis violating one of the #1 rules of social media, and that you don't beef down. Here he is working in Alabama, beefing down towards Texas A&M, a program beneath the stature of the Crimson Tide. All of this happening because of the pots and pans they've been rattling in College Station. I don't know if this was an orchestrated effort, but I think that Texas A&M of the week, they're the biggest winner in the SEC.
I tend to agree with you, and that's kind of why I mentioned, Josh Gaddis, it's like, you weren't there for the national title. I love what you're doing. As an Alabama guy, you're trying to bring these guys in. I think this has a lot to do with the recruiting grounds in Texas. I think this has a lot to do with guys like Bobby Brown that they lost out on to Texas A&M, kind of reminding some of the people out there, and you've mentioned it, Alabama a couple times on the recruiting trail this year were told no at certain points, and they lost recruits to different programs around the SEC. So I think Josh Gaddis is trying to do his best as a young recruiter to reestablish Alabama as that prominent recruiting ground.
See, here's why I think this is a big win for Texas A&M. Even though the plaque seems dumb to a lot of people, why it kind of works here, and even though that the edit of the Jalen Ramsey stuff that he was upset about drew some criticism, the reason why it kind of works for me is, and I'm going to make some people mad when I say this, and it's not my intention, but if you look at the 14 teams in the SEC, the two divisions, 7 on one side, 7 on the other, it's amazing how those divisions can almost be cut in half. You've got 3 on top and 4 on the bottom. In the SEC East, over the course of a decade, how many times has a team other than Tennessee, Florida, or Georgia win the SEC East? Look at the history of this division. It almost never happens. It's happened before, but it almost never happens. The SEC West, much the same way with LSU, Auburn, and Alabama, that trio of teams from the West is going to win just about every time in the SEC West. What A&M is saying with its national championship black and the Tim Brewster stuff on Twitter is, I don't know who used to be in the bottom 4 of this SEC West, but it ain't us anymore because we got Jimbo Fisher now, and we're taking somebody's spot. I don't know if it's LSU, I don't know if it's Auburn, I don't know if it's Alabama, but we intend to take somebody's spot and move them down. And from that standpoint, A&M does draw a delineation between itself and Arkansas, who's got no juice. Ole Miss, who's got like negative juice. Mississippi State is trying to build around a first-year coach that for the most part people don't really know very well. A&M is completely and totally differentiated its brand from the rest of them.
Yeah, but you got to think of it in terms of A&M, though. I mean, you look back at the history of the SEC and what has been on the West, what has been on the East. A&M hasn't been in the SEC, and so I think they're trying to figure out where they belong in the hierarchy. I think that Jimbo Fisher is doing everything he can to establish them as a member of that. So that's kind of my reason why I don't have a problem with what they're doing. And I actually do agree with you. They came out on the positive end of this thing. Is hey, we're making waves on a national scene. I think that I actually took away from the video and the trophy and everything else a different kind of direction than you did. I looked at it and I thought about the pressure that's brewing on Jimbo right now.
That's without a doubt.
I think that you look at it and you say, boy, recruiting tactics and national championship. I look at Jimbo's face and I'm sitting there going, this is like the chancellor being like, hey, by the way, if you don't win a national title in the next 7 years, we're going to have some serious issues about what's going on.
But there's pressure on everybody. I mean, everybody's going to get fired if they don't win. So while you're employed, you might as well shoot your shot, and that's what Jimbo Fisher's doing.
Yeah.
As another example of this, in the comment section, Jamie Bailey says Jimbo is trash. Cliff Nelson noticed that and says Jamie, who comments a lot, says Jamie hates Jimbo. That's what Cliff Nelson says. But here's the thing, though. Nobody hates, Joe Moorhead? People don't even know who he is. Nobody hates him. Nobody hates Matt Luke. Nobody hates Chad Morris. If you're a coach that somebody hates, then you're already doing something right. Because you know what? Nobody hates losers. Okay, I mean, people hate people who are trying to make a name for themselves. They hate people who are trying to sort of climb a ladder. And chaos sort of is a very good ladder here, and that's what I think that Jimbo Fisher's trying to utilize.
I agree with you. And listen, we mentioned this last week that I think in the very short time that he's been in the SEC, Jimbo Fisher already has become that kind of guy that has the target on that other fan bases love to hate, because he does have that national championship pedigree, and he is getting paid a ton of money. And Texas A&M really historically, for what you think the future could be historically, it just hasn't been there either. And so they become kind of that easy little stepbrother right now to pick on in terms of what the SEC hierarchy has been. But that's why I keep giving them the credit, is that A&M's doing things their own way. Hey, we're not part of SEC history. We don't have this, this crazy background to point to. But what we are doing is kind of flexing our muscle, giving $75 million to a national championship head coach, and trying to move forward and pick fights with national champions.
Esteban Estevez says, LOL, he's never going to win a national championship at Texas A&M. Listen, it's hard for anybody to win a national championship, but I like the energy and the enthusiasm that Jimbo Fisher's bringing to this conversation. By the way, Steven Sanders, the Alabama fan, likes the idea that Alabama used the Kings of Confetti phrase. You like that phrase as an Alabama guy?
Yeah, that was used. I can't remember what year that was. It might have been 2015 or 2012. That was used on Alabama's national championship T-shirts. They put on the podium. When they go up there and get the trophy. That was used on their T-shirt. I thought it was pretty clever when they did do it.
Cherokee Lee Black says, this is funny. I live near FSU campus, but a diehard Alabama fan. Jimbo was okay as a coach here at Florida State, but I don't really think he'll take A&M to a championship. I may be wrong, but I don't think so. I think that Texas A&M as a program is underrated. I mean, here's an example of this where, Lee here's a sort of a perfect descriptor of this. Sort of sight unseen, he sort of looks at Texas A&M and says, I don't really feel national championship for that program. But what thing would be a ceiling on A&M's ability to accomplish here? It's not fertile recruiting soil because it's in Texas. It's not money because A&M spends it hand over fist. I mean, listen, there's some specific reasons why a program like Ole Miss may not win a national championship, but those kinds of things don't exist for Texas A&M. It just sort of hasn't happened yet. It's not a guarantee that it ever will happen, but because it hasn't happened yet, it's not proof of anything.
No, I agree. And I think I speak for maybe most SEC fans, and you guys, obviously, you will let me know in the comment section when I say this. I look at A&M more of an SEC type team than I ever did Mizzou. And Mizzou won back-to-back SEC East titles a few years back, and they were new to the conference, and Mizzou was this big thing, and they're coming to Atlanta for SEC championship games. I still see Texas A&M fitting in better with the SEC crowd. Just over sheer passion about your football program, I feel like A&M kind of belongs in that mold a little better. So I think that it's kind of like a heartwarming thing, if you will, that they get the target on their back so soon. I think they're going to make some friends here pretty soon.
Jason Lyons and Cliff Nelson both making reference to me using the beef down phrase. That's a phrase it's okay for me to use, right?
Beef down?
Yeah, Alabama beefed down with Texas A&M. People use that phrase, right?
You guys ever even heard of that?
People use, beef down. If you're on top of the mountain, Michael, you've never heard that phrase before?
No, I've never heard that.
If you're like
if
you're the top of the food chain, you don't beef down with somebody below because it only helps them and hurts you.
I don't know. I've heard stoop to their level or something like that, but beef down.
Sort of a better way of saying it. Jason Lyons, Cliff Nelson, they both seem to like it. I'm going to go with them on that. Let me do item number 2 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. We'll get more of your comments on the Bama Texas A&M situation if you want to give it. Item number 2 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. I told you a moment ago that, we read a quote the other day because it didn't have the audio to play. Now when you hear the audio, my opinion on this kind of changes a little bit. We talked the other day about what Brian Johnson, the Florida quarterbacks coach, had said about Felipe Franks, and if Frank somehow had the advantage in the quarterback competition based on what Johnson said. When you read the quote the other day, I left that thinking, maybe they're trying to favor Franks on this one. When you listen to the audio, it kind of comes across a little different. I'm going to play you a couple clips here of Brian Johnson talking about both of his quarterbacks. Let me start with what Johnson said about Felipe Franks and whether him having been at Florida gives him an advantage for when the Gators start spring practice here. Here is Brian Johnson.
It's going to be open. We'll put everybody in a position to see what they can do. The beauty of us all coming in, I talked to the guys about this yesterday, is that everybody's kind of starting from the same spot in terms of learning our offense. Sometimes it's very, very hard to make up for the experience or lack thereof for some of the other guys because it's just, I think that's life's best teacher, is experience. So, he might have some advantages of having played in SEC football games before, but from a standpoint of us practicing and putting in the offense, everybody's kind of starting from ground zero.
So we read that quote the other day.
Yep.
When you hear it, there's not quite as much passion in Johnson's voice as maybe I read the quote with the other day. I don't walk away here thinking that. Now, Felipe Frank's going to get the first snap with the first team on the first practice just because that's the way it goes. I think he probably is the starter for the first couple of games because for the Gators in 2018, that's mostly inconsequential. But this notion that somehow because Franks has been at Florida, played in the SEC, even with a new coach, that's going to give him an advantage. When you hear Brian Johnson there, those words ring a little bit hollow to me.
Yeah, I take him at his word, and you know, we talked about this yesterday, that right now everybody within that offense is a true freshman. I mean, everybody is showing up trying to learn Dan Mullen's offense. I don't think many things that Jim McElwain did translate over to what Dan Mullen's going to be doing within this offense. So Felipe Franks is learning just like Emory Jones is at this point. I think they all kind of start, but I think he pointed to something big right there when you talk about experience that Felipe Franks has and knowing his weapons, knowing his offensive linemen, knowing what's going on around him. I still, obviously, like you said, I fully expect Felipe Franks to take the first snap of spring. I'd actually be shocked if he's not the guy that takes the first snap of fall. But I've always said all along that if Emory Jones at some point in this next season is not your starting quarterback or is not getting meaningful snaps, then it's not a good thing for Florida fans.
Daniel Grohl says, I hope Jake Allen gets a legit shot. Kid's got a great arms, athletic, very accurate with the ball. We haven't heard a lot of Florida fans talk up Jake Allen, but Daniel Grohl does. Jared Johnson says, I love Brian Johnson. I'm excited for him and Dan to develop both Felipe and Emory. And I think that Jared's line of thought is kind of where it goes more here in terms of Florida having a quarterback that can succeed or give Florida a chance on the field to succeed in 2018. It kind of comes down to either Felipe Franks, who we just heard Brian Johnson talking about there, or Emory Jones, the true freshman. Could Jones, as a true freshman, step in and earn the Florida quarterback job? Well, as you might imagine, Johnson addressed that issue as well. Take a listen.
At the end of the day, we're going to play the best guys that we feel give us the opportunity to go out there and compete at the high level. Now, that's difficult for me to say right now without having seen him in a live practice situation with our guys yet. So I don't know if I can fully answer that question, but he's going to get every opportunity to go out there and compete and showcase his talents and see how he fits.
What I notice about this is, and maybe you disagree, but this is so different than so many other coaches. Not every SEC team has a quarterback coach. So from that standpoint, it's a little bit different as well. But when coaches talk about quarterbacks, what Johnson is saying about both Franks and Jones is a lot different than a lot of other coaches talking about quarterbacks in that we've come to expect coaches to have an agenda. I mean, I can obviously reference Georgia here pretty easy. Last year during the spring, incumbent started with Jacob Eason. Jake Fromm was there, and the thought back then was Fromm was going to push Eason. So every comment that Kirby Smart ever made was this thing of, hey, we've got a competition and Fromm is pushing Eason. Well, as it turned out, Fromm pushed Eason out the door. But at the time,
we had a good shove.
Yeah, at the time we didn't know that. But Kirby clearly had an agenda when he talked about his quarterbacks. I believe that at Alabama this year, Nick Saban's going to have an agenda. I believe that agenda is to keep Jalen Hurts from transferring. We're going to hear a lot of well-placed compliments of Jalen Hurts publicly because I don't think that Nick Saban wants Jalen Hurts to go anywhere. We'll have more on that, obviously, later on in the show today. There's an agenda there. You may see Ed Orgeron and Steve Ensminger have an agenda with Lowell Narcisse and Miles Brennan. Brennan has played, Narcisse hasn't. I think they're going to want to even that playing field between those two. They'll probably praise Lowell Narcisse a little bit. But for Brian Johnson, his words there about both Emory Johnson and Felipe Franks are almost totally absent of an agenda. Yeah. I don't think there is one.
Yeah. No, listen, I think what you're hearing there, and it's interesting to kind of hear you bring this up because I think all of those situations are in different places than what Florida is in right now. I think Dan Mullen gets down there. I think everybody obviously expects year one, you're going to have your ups, you're going to have your downs. It's more about the future. It's more about the next 4 years than it is year one under Dan Mullen. That's not the case at LSU right now. LSU needs the final signal caller. If not this year, then they need to obviously recruit one that can be the guy of the future. Alabama and Georgia the same way. I mean, Alabama and Georgia had their sights set a little higher than just who's going to be the starting quarterback this year. Alabama and Georgia have their sights set on SEC titles, national championships, and getting those things. Right now, Florida is just, boy, we need to find a quarterback that can stick, that we can stick with for the next few years.
Rick Keene makes a comment. Rick's obviously a good Florida fan. I think his comment is probably the best I can tell, very emblematic of how Florida fans feel. He says, Gator fans are not patient. If we lose 4 or 5 games with Franks versus 4 or 5 games with any other quarterback, it's not going to look good for Mullen. I think Rick is right about that. I think that if Florida were to play Felipe Franks for the full season, that's probably exactly what would happen. However, I think that Rick and the other Florida fans would agree, though, that you can't be seen as just handing the job over to Emory Jones. I mean, nobody likes, the kid from your high school or your college that had this sort of silver spoon in his mouth or her mouth that was just sort of, given everything by parents and have to earn anything. We don't like those people generally. We don't like them when they're quarterbacks either. If Felipe Franks is just sort of given the Florida quarterbacking job, or I should say if Emory Jones were just given that because he's a better overall talent than Felipe Franks, which I believe that he probably is, it actually stunts Jones' growth just a little bit.
Completely
so
agree.
For Rick Keene here, who I think is insinuating he'd prefer Emory Jones, I think most Gator fans would too. But I think the way that you get there is by Jones having to beat out Felipe Franks, and that competition lasts into the season, and the double advantage of that is it keeps Felipe Franks from transferring.
I could not agree more with what you said about it stunning its growth. And I've said this, I don't know if I've actually talked about this on air, though. I believe if Jacob Eason, when he first got to Georgia, would have had somebody to compete against, he might have actually hit a different ceiling at Georgia.
Because he was so much better than anybody else on that roster.
There was no question when Jacob Eason showed up, he was going to be the guy taking those first snaps for Georgia. I mean, there just wasn't. He had nobody to compete against. And so I agree with you to the point where you look at Emory Jones, and you're hoping Felipe Franks can mold himself to what Dan Mullen's offense is, or you hope one of those other guys in that quarterback depth chart can actually push what Emory Jones could be in the future, because that, honestly, in the end, could be what really develops Emory Jones under Dan Mullen.
Andrew Ingram says Kyle Trask. Listen, every SEC team's got one of these guys. They're not all quarterbacks, but there's a pocket of Florida fans that just will not give up on Kyle Trask. I just don't think that's going to happen. I don't think there's any there with Kyle Trask, a guy that didn't even start for his high school team.
Yeah, that's tough for me. That's tough for me to look at a guy like Felipe Franks that obviously has a ton of arm talent, like we talked about yesterday. The upside of a guy like Emory Jones, and then Kyle Trask is just a big question mark. I mean, I think it would be one of the most shocking things I've seen as far as SEC quarterbacks go to see Kyle Trask get meaningful snaps at some point this fall.
Item number 3 on our SEC Country Line First and 10 list, Auburn is beginning its spring practice here today, but as it does so, it's doing so without one of its top players, and the most important player probably on the roster, as Gus Malzahn explained to us not too long ago. Jarrett Stidham going to be away from the Gators at least at the beginning of the spring. Here is Malzahn to remind us why.
At this point, it looks like he probably will not start participating until after spring break. So if that is the case, the two younger guys will have a chance to, get those 4 or 5 practices under their belt before he gets back.
So remember the context here. College spring break for all students sort of falls right in the middle of this sort of spring practice window. Some teams like to do their practices after the spring break. Right. Some teams like to sort of do a lot of theirs before. Some teams like to sort of split it. Auburn starting early here. They'll have spring break. At that point in time, maybe Jarrett Stidham's back and ready to go. I did notice we showed that video the other day of them with the Iron Bowl trophy. He had the big old, what do you call it, sling or whatever on his shoulder there coming off the surgery. So with Auburn set to go today, the weather's not great. I don't know how that impacts the Auburn spring practice. I guess maybe they're indoors instead. Who's more important? The guy not going through spring practice right now, Jarrett Stidham, or the other guys who are on the field right now? Where's your attention here for Auburn at the start of the spring?
My attention is going to be at the quarterback position, but it's not going to be because of Malik Willis or because of Jarrett Stidham or even because of Joey Gatewood. I want to see how much that quarterback is having to escape the pocket and having to make throws on the run.
Yeah.
And obviously you guys know me, you know my background. I love to watch the offensive line. I love to grade that offensive line. When I look at the holes that Auburn's going to have on this offensive line.
And when he says great offensive line, he means give every offensive lineman that's ever played any game anywhere an A. That's Mike's version of grading the offensive line.
It's a hard job.
It's A's and A+s all across the board for every team ever.
It's a hard job. And so I think that it almost works out perfectly in my mind for Gus Malzahn. I really Jarrett Stidham, for all the athleticism and the underrated, athleticism you think he has, he's still a pocket passer, and he showed a little bit of an ability to kind of elude from the pocket last year. But when you look at the Clemson game, that's not what his game is. And so I think when you rebuild that offensive line during spring practice, and you have a guy like Malik Willis and Joey Gatewood in the backfield, I think it makes the offensive line look a little bit better.
Yeah. So, I don't have a strong opinion on this one way or another. I think there are players who are seasoned enough and good enough that spring practice is not that important for them. I think that Jarrett Stidham's probably one of those guys. I do think Stidham's presence, where he do be on the field, helps other people. I think it helps the offensive line probably. Once you get to like real scrimmages, not the first practice, that's probably not that big of a deal one way or another. Additional timing with the wide receivers in the roster, I think that'd be a good thing too. I think if Auburn gets into that sort of top 5 conversation again, playoff contention once again here in 2018, I think that Stidham's going to have to be a big part of that because Kerryon Johnson, the guy you see on your screen there, is not on this roster anymore. Right. I think that Stidham being there would help the wide receivers develop, would help the offensive line develop. I think that Stidham probably doesn't need these spring practices, but the guys who are playing with Stidham can certainly use that opportunity to get more familiar with him.
And you definitely, if you're JB Grimes, you're going to have to grade this differently. I think, when you look at the offensive lineman that could be there in Calvin Ashley's name and obviously Prince Tega and some of the other people that will be mixed in on the offensive line, you have to grade them differently, I think, with Malik Willis in the backfield than you would Jarrett Stidham. And that's kind of why my eyes will be trained on them. Obviously we won't see much of it, but when we do get to the spring game, I want to see if somebody's being able to step up in the pocket or if it's Malik Willis that's rolling out and throwing dimes on the run. Because I think Jarrett Stidham obviously can do that, but I think he's got a ceiling to what he can do on the run. So I want to see how well they're actually protecting this horseshoe of a pocket and allowing these young guys to step up.
Cliff Farabee having some fun at Gus Malzahn's expense. Esteban Esteves having some fun at Jarrett Stidham's expense. At least we can sort of put away the nonsense from a year ago when all y'all that are watching the show every day were trying to tell me that Jarrett Stidham wasn't a good quarterback. At least we can put that nonsense to bed.
Well, I think you had awarded him the Heisman Trophy before we even got out of.
I was right.
Got out of July.
I was right. This guy had Auburn on the doorstep of a college football playoff. Listen, I don't do the "see, I told you so" stuff a lot, but on this one, I'm gonna allow myself far removed from the season, especially if you're gonna reinvent history like there. I'm gonna allow myself a chance to say, you know what? See, I told you so.
But if you do
Excuse
run
me
this,
one second.
Don't hurt that elbow, but reaching back there. If you do run it back, though, I think in a way you and I were both kind of right when we talked about this conversation last year. When the conversation came up, it wasn't whether or not I thought Jarrett Stidham would be good. I thought Jarrett Stidham would be great. The conversation, as it always ended, was if Auburn is very good, Jarrett Stidham won't be the one in Heisman consideration. It'll be Kerryon Johnson or one of the running backs. And I think he obviously had a good enough year to where he's headed to the NFL. So, obviously Jarrett Stidham turned out to be good, but I think Kerryon Johnson was a bigger part of that offense.
Cliff Farabee in the comment section. I hope I'm pronouncing that correct, Cliff. Maybe it's Farabee, but if I mispronounced, I apologize. He said, Auburn in the playoffs? You talking about playoffs? I don't do a good Jim Mora voice, so I can't do the impersonation there, but I believe that's what he's going for. Cliff, don't do this to me again. I don't want to defend Auburn, okay? I don't want to talk Auburn up.
Yeah, I get this a lot, too.
Y'all don't put me in a position where I got to remind you that Auburn is still a top 5 like team. They're like a top 10 type team. They bring a ton of productivity back, pretty good recruiting classes, among the best quarterbacks in the SEC. Y'all don't make me defend Auburn. That's not what I want to do. But if you're going to be trashing the comment section, I got to tell the truth.
Yeah, no, I'm the same way, and it's almost like there's fan bases throughout the SEC, and LSU is going to have bragging rights over Auburn. They were able to win this last year, but when you look at what Auburn did last year, it's almost like people tend to forget that Auburn knocked off number 1 Georgia and knocked off number 1 Alabama and had their way at home with some of these teams. So, yeah, Auburn didn't end up winning the SEC title last year, but boy, it was not a failure of a season at all.
Jamie Bailey says, take what I'm saying with a grain of salt today. On my earlier show, that's Dog Nation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, I said that I don't eat hot dogs anymore. Do you eat hot dogs?
No.
A couple years, I used to love hot dogs. Go to a ballpark, go to a game, have some hot dogs. It just seemed like the thing to do. A couple years ago, I looked at this thing and said,
yeah, I'm the same way.
That is not food.
It'd
be healthier to eat the package.
Is that society does anybody eat hot dogs anymore? I feel like everybody's kind of like focused on what's actually in their food more than they were 10 years ago.
To show you what a terrible parent I am, my children love them.
No, yeah.
Love them.
Listen, I don't have kids, but from what I understand, you give them whatever just makes them happy. It doesn't really matter what exactly it is.
All right, so anyway, let's do item. We'll get more of your comments. You want to talk some Auburn? We'll do that. Let's talk some LSU here for a minute, though, for item number 5 on our SEC Country Live first and 10 list. So Andy Staples, SI.com, was asked about the big important coordinator hires in the SEC. We've done some version of this in the past, but I think it's sort of important to keep sort of circling back to these newcomer, at least new hires, new faces in coordinator roles, and who's going to have the biggest impact. And one of the names at the very top, in fact, the name at the very top of Andy Staples' list over at Sports Illustrated was Steve Ensminger, the new LSU offensive coordinator, at least new in terms of a full-time role. I thought what Staples wrote about Ensminger was pretty interesting. I want to read that to you here in terms of why this hire is so crucial. Let's take a look at Andy Staples on that. He says, the one who could have the most impact is LSU offensive coordinator Steve Ensminger. But we don't know yet whether the impact's going to be negative or it's going to be positive. When Ensminger ran the offense in 2016, the Tigers rolled up points against bad defense from Ole Miss, Arkansas, and Texas A&M. But they averaged just 2.5 yards per play against Alabama in a 10-0 loss at home and couldn't punch the ball into the end zone against Florida on several occasions in a game the Tigers probably should have won. So it sounds like for Andy Staples, the jury is very much out for him in terms of Andy Staples. He doesn't rip Steve Ensminger there. He just points out that when he was calling plays on the interim basis, he was better against bad defenses than he was against good. The more we look at this LSU situation involving Ed Orgeron, it's a real head scratcher to me. You were right. Matt Canada has been a bit of a journeyman. Typically, when you bounced around a lot, you were probably partially to blame for why you've moved around so much. So maybe he's not an easy guy to work with. But I'm going to say sight unseen, he's a better offensive coordinator than Steve Ensminger would be. Yeah,
no, I agree with you. I honestly, I don't know what to think about Steve Ensminger yet, because I think that this is one of those things where you look at him, as an offensive coordinator, and you want to think good things. I think you look at some of the teams he's going to be matching up against, and I think it's very easy for a guy like Andy Staples to look at Alabama against LSU and say, well, you know what, he wasn't good against Alabama. Boy, if we're judging offensive coordinators, though, based on what they did against Alabama over the last 10 years, then none of them are going to look that great. You know what I'm saying? Like, they've averaged being like the #1 defense in the country for the last 10 years. So I'm not ready to put Steve Ensminger to bed based on what he did against Alabama as an interim offensive coordinator 2 years ago.
To my credit, this almost never happens. It has been pointed out to me, and I want to comment on everything you said about Steve Ensminger.
I heard something in my ear.
This almost never happens. We do this show 4 times a week. We're coming up on our 1-year anniversary. Listen, this is the only thing we have in the way of a script. I almost never skip over a topic. I just completely skipped over number 4.
Skipped one.
All right, so Tennessee fans, hang with us. We'll get back to Tennessee.
Well, this is one of those things where you got to erase the chalkboard and say like 0 days since we've
it's like a workplace accident.
We've been a while.
0 days. Because I did this about 4 months ago probably. I skipped over one of these. Listen. This job is not as easy as I make it look on a daily basis. First of all, let me just say that. And second of all, when it does happen, we'll go admit ourselves and we'll get back to that. We'll do the Tennessee thing in a minute. What are you laughing about now?
Kate Thompson's killing me over here on YouTube. She says, she's talking about you. She said, there is no person on camera in all of the internet that it is easier to picture eating a hot dog and spilling mustard on his shirt. And boy, I got to tell you, I got to agree with that. That is so spot on. I have got to agree with that 100%. Because you could.
I am, for some reason, Kate, on YouTube. Thanks for pointing that out. Nothing makes me feel better than to hear that. It is amazing, though, how much of a food dribbler I am. I don't understand these people who don't ever get any food on their clothes. I mean, you can look at me and you can see what I had for lunch, what I had for dinner. I mean, it's like a map of the world on the front of my shirt by the time the day's over with.
Boy, that's
so thanks for pointing that out, Kate, because there's no doubt that's happened plenty of times in the past there. That little chili just sort of oozes out and ends up all over you. That's definitely happened. Anyway, reset your Steve Ensminger point of view for 2 seconds and I'll respond to it.
No, gotcha. No, what I was saying is that when we talk about Steve Ensminger and we talk about the games that Andy Staples conveniently kind of brings up right there, listen, I think there's a million arguments you can have against Steve Ensminger. The fact that he's been an assistant coach for so many years and really hasn't had a title like this much, throughout his career, we can ask questions about what this offense is. We can ask questions about, listen, I was sold a bill of goods about Matt Canada coming in and changing this LSU offense to be one thing, and then a year after Ed Orgeron gets the job, we're stuck with Steve Ensminger back again. We might be going back to Les Miles era. You can point out all that. Don't point out to me what they did 2 years ago when he was an interim offensive coordinator, and that's what they averaged against Alabama. Anybody in that role is going to look bad when you look back on what Andy Staples has done.
But hold on. From a yards per play standpoint, less than 3 yards per play is pretty bad.
No, it's awful.
That's pretty bad.
No, it's awful. It's awful. But my point is that when we've thought about getting out of the Les Miles era and moving on with Ed Orgeron, half of it was because of Leonard Fournette's success against Alabama or some of the other running back success against Alabama, trying to go to a different style of offense. That's what you should be attacking here. It's not what he did as an interim offensive coordinator 2 years ago.
Esteban Estevez says Coach Ensminger is going to be great. And I will give the LSU folks who watch our show and listen on the podcast credit. They have not wavered from this. LSU people like Ensminger.
We heard it from Cliff the day he got hired.
I think this is one of those things that, sometimes, people can be very loyal to one politician or another. I think the LSU fans right now are very loyal to Orgeron. They want to truly believe that he's got things figured out. They want to truly believe that he's going to sort of chart the course. Even if the course that he's charting is very different than the one that he was just charting a few weeks ago, they want to believe that he's got it figured out.
I think there's something to be said about that. I think every fan base probably has done that to a fault at some point. I mean, we still had Tennessee fans last year talking about Butch Jones and how, Butch Jones, Mike Griffith would come on here.
We didn't have as many, though. I mean, we have more LSU people more vocally in favor of Ed Orgeron than we had about Butch Jones a year ago. And I think Orgeron may be in a little bit of trouble here. He may be in over his head. But you can't tell that the LSU fans right now, where the majority of Tennessee fans would be like, you know what, you're probably right about Butch Jones.
Well,
this guy's more.
I was going to say, I think with the lack of it that we've had is any opposition to it. It's for Tennessee fans, and even going back to, days when Mark Riddick was at Georgia or when Mike Shula was at Alabama, you had fans that were like half and half. Boy, I think he's on the right track. Just got to get a few things fixed. We haven't heard anybody that thinks that Ed Orgeron's off track. Most LSU fans, it's like, listen, we are completely 100% on board, and you are only 1 year into Ed Orgeron's tenure, so I kind of understand. It's not like he's been given 3 years.
Andy Tillman says Steve Ensminger coached at Georgia with Ray Goff. He's not that good. Well, first of all, everybody looked bad in the Ray Goff era. But my point is, for those who don't remember, Ray Goff was the Georgia head coach in the early 90s. This guy was calling plays for Georgia like at the dawn of the era of the SEC championship game. I mean, this is not like some spring chicken here you're bringing in on the LSU side of things. And it seems like play calling is a bit of a young man's game to me.
Well, 98 Sports Talk over here on the YouTube page says you got to give Coach O a shot. You can't fire 2 coaches this quickly. It's a bad look. But here's my point about that. Orgeron, it's not like, this is not like Texas A&M going out and getting Jimbo Fisher. Orgeron, from everything you ever hear about that LSU coaching search, Orgeron was option number 3. I mean, he's the interim coach that you just kind of had to fall back on. So I understand what you're saying. You can't fire 2 coaches that quickly, but I don't know that Ed Orgeron was ever really entrenched as the head coach.
I don't believe that Ed Orgeron's going to get fired after this season. I believe that he could do something to get him fired after the following season. This may be the point where LSU fans lose faith, even if it takes another year to move on from it.
The quarterback position this year, I don't know if it comes through recruiting or if it comes through actual on-field play. The quarterback position at LSU has to actually look like at some point during Orgeron's tenure they're going to take a step
Final
forward.
comment from me on this. Shane Higgins says, whether it's Bill Walsh, Don Coryell, Steve Ensminger, doesn't matter until a quarterback is found. That's the other thing that Orgeron's got to do for 2019. You have got to get, whether it's Grant Gunnell or somebody else, you've got to build your 2019 class. And a year that's pretty deep in the state of Louisiana, you got to build that around somebody's quarterback.
That's my point, is that I don't know if it comes on the field or I don't know if it comes in landing a recruit, but at some point between now and February, you have to show me that quarterback position and that offense are moving in the right direction, or I think you're going to start hearing about Ed Orgeron.
All right, time out for 1 second. Can we do number 6 and then go back and do number 4? Because I feel like it'll sort of flow better if we do that. So let me do item number 6 here. And Tennessee fans, I promise we're going to spend a lot of time on your issue. But let me do the Alabama thing first, because I think it sets us up for that. A name that we've talked about a couple times here on SEC Country Live. Yesterday, I guess this became something close to official. Bruce Feldman had this on Twitter. Of course, Feldman from SI, pointing out that Gardner Minshew, who had been at East Carolina, tells me he's committed to Alabama, going to arrive there at the end of May, join the Tide. He had a 16-7 touchdown interception ratio last year, and then they wrote a story about him there at SI.com. I think there's a chance he was not going to be the starting quarterback at ECU this year. I think he brought in a pretty good freshman, although maybe I'm wrong about that because I don't know that much about the Pirates. But you and I both have been kind of the same mind on this, is that this was one of those things where Alabama just needs an additional body.
Yes. No, and it's hard because it's like, how excited should I be? You don't want to have to be excited.
Right.
This is an insurance policy.
That's a great point.
It's an insurance policy. You don't want to have to use this guy, but I think you do get a little bit excited. There's just more depth there because, fast forward, and obviously Alabama fans hate the thought of this happening. Fast forward to the summer. If Jalen Hurts does decide, this summer that, listen, I'm losing this quarterback battle. I really would like to play quarterback for the last 2 years of college. I'm going to go somewhere else. Boy, then all of a sudden you are dangerously thin. On a team that could be stacked offensively next year, you are dangerously thin at the quarterback position.
One thing we know for sure, this is not a knee-jerk reaction on the part of Nick Saban to anything. This is something that he apparently had planned in the works for a while, because go back to National Signing Day, even back then he was already talking about bringing in another quarterback, and based on the way that he interacted with the media and the Alabama officials that day, he sort of already had somebody on his mind. He was Saban from back on National Signing Day.
I think that we'll probably have a quarterback join us some kind of way between now and then, which I don't think I can comment about. But look, when you have really good young players at a position, sometimes it's hard to attract another guy at that particular position. So I think you all know our circumstance at quarterback right now with the players that we have here and what grade they're in and how much more eligibility they have. So rather than reach for somebody, we would rather try to solve the issue maybe a different way with maybe a more experienced guy down the road. And, certainly think that next year we might be in a position to get a really good player at that position who could be someone who could impact us in the future.
I think Saban's right about that. I don't think anybody in Tuscaloosa is ever going to walk around wearing a Gardner Minshew jersey as a replica. But compare Minshew, who did have decent numbers at East Carolina and a pretty good American Athletic Conference. Compare his numbers there to some three-star quarterback they would have plucked out of high school. Minshew's a much better addition for Alabama. And as Saban points out, this is just a stopgap anyway until they bring in Paul Bryant's grandson, Bear Bryant's grandson, and to his brother. I mean, so Alabama's already got the legacies rolling in for quarterbacks in 2019. They just need somebody to fill up a roster spot right now, and Minshew provides that. You call it an insurance policy. I think you're right about that. No one gets excited about buying insurance, but you don't want to get caught out it, and this is what Minshew is. Yeah, no, it's listen, we'd love to think that, Jalen Hurts and Tua, this thing is going to go on, and both of these guys are going to play this year, and, both are going to get meaningful snaps. But on a day when we've talked about a number of backup quarterbacks and quarterback competitions, the one thing you don't want to is be without both of the top guys. You know what I mean? Like, it's fine. You talk about Felipe Franks and Emory Jones. Boy, without either one of those guys, then all of a sudden you're looking at, Kyle Trask, and that's what you don't want. I think this is what we're kind of dealing with. I don't know what Gardner Minshew is as a quarterback. I haven't watched film on the guy. From what I've heard, not the strongest arm, but a good decision maker and gets it out quick. That's all Alabama would need at a position. If he has to come in crunch time, say like a fourth quarter, Tua rolls an ankle, that's what you're looking for. Let me ask the folks who help us with the show every day and the folks who are watching, because I know you have no idea who this is. Lee Allen Wells in the comment section says, Mike, I found your pint-sized twin brother. It's the actor Aaron Paul from Breaking Bad. What do you think about that?
Oh, I know who that is.
Is he an Aaron Paul doppelganger here?
Aaron
Michael
Paul's,
says I can see that.
He's the young guy on Breaking Bad?
He's the younger guy.
Yeah, I know who that is. Listen,
have you watched this show?
Listen, I'm in there on Breaking Bad.
You watched the show? I'm not making fun. You watched the show?
Yeah, I've seen Breaking Bad. It's the '90s stuff that gets me, man. It's the '90s stuff. Any of the more recent shows, and I'm a binge watcher. I've seen Breaking Bad. I've knocked that out. I'm a Game of Thrones type of guy. Yeah. Shockingly enough.
For me, I don't want to get on this tangent. I didn't think Breaking Bad was as great as everybody else did, but that's probably a different topic for a different day. For now, let me go back and hit the topic that we missed. And it actually is a pretty good follow-up to what we were just talking about there with Gardner Minshew, because on our topic number 4 here on SEC Country Live, Gardner Minshew is also one of those quarterbacks that maybe Tennessee would like to have had, because Alabama sort of wants a graduate transfer quarterback. You can make a case that Tennessee may need one, and the need here is maybe putting a little bit of extra pressure on brand new Vols coach Jeremy Pruitt. I thought that Blake Morgan from SECCountry.com actually made an interesting point about this when he said, for Pruitt, who's known as being a great recruiter, in fact, let me let you see the quote here. He says, injuries held back the offensive line in 2017. This caused Garantano, McBride, and Quentin Dormady to take a lot of hits from the defenses. That makes adding Keller Chris, that's the Stanford graduate transfer. We don't know where he's going yet, but Tennessee wants him. He says that makes adding Chris so important. Pruitt came to Tennessee with the reputation of being a great recruiter. This is a battle he needs to win. I think Blake Morgan sets this up pretty well. Just in terms of survival, you probably need another quarterback, because there's a chance that Garantano or McBride, neither one are any good. I'm not telling you Keller Chris is good either, but having 3 to choose from gives you a chance of finding one who can play. And for Pruitt, who's a recruiter, how about you go out and recruit this guy?
I don't know. I don't see it as being that big a deal. And here's why. Because how many times, we've talked about the Auburn offensive line situation. We've also talked about Trey Smith. Who knows what his future holds at Tennessee. I don't think Keller Chris, I think if you're looking for him to come in and make an impact, well, you're looking in the wrong direction. I think when you look at that offensive line, the struggles they're going to have, the last thing you need behind that offensive line is a statue at quarterback, and that's exactly what you're going to get in Keller Chris, even though that's what they're trying to run as a pro style. When I look at that offensive line, when I look at that running game, I would much rather have a Jarrett Garantano or Will McBride on the field than I would a guy in Keller Chris who is not going to move his feet much. Well, obviously, one of his upsides is getting the ball out quickly and making good decisions, but who knows if the running game's even going to get going next year at Tennessee. So I'd much rather have a guy back there that can move around. I don't think this is something you had to have. They signed a quarterback. There's still 3 deep at the position at Tennessee.
98 Sports Talk says if Trey Smith's out at Tennessee, it's not going to matter who the quarterback is. He also says that Keller Chris not the answer. Saw him at Stanford. He's not good, or ungood, as 98 Sports Talk jokingly says. He's not as good as the Costello kid, who, by the way, is also going to miss spring practice for Stanford. He's not as good as him. But here's the mistake I think we all have a tendency to make sometimes. We sort of underrate the value of an average player if the alternative is having nobody. I'm not giving you a choice between Keller Christ and, Peyton Manning. I'm giving you a choice between Keller Christ or just 2 quarterbacks.
Yeah.
And from that standpoint, that's why it's important here because, you can't go 3-9. Okay, you gotta win a few games here. Somebody, Brian Wright in the comment section over on Facebook Live said that Pruitt's in trouble. I don't think Pruitt's in trouble right now, but if you have an embarrassingly bad record, you kind of can be.
No. Listen, everybody and the Tennessee fans, I think, understand this. There's not much that Jeremy Pruitt can do with this year. There's just not. He did everything he could on the recruiting trail. I think if you get to bowl eligibility, boy, you've knocked it out of the park right now for Jeremy Pruitt. When you look at the Trey Smith situation, when you look at the quarterback situation, when you look at what you have defensively up front, I think that winning 6 games is knocking it out of the park, and I don't think anybody's going to dock Jeremy Pruitt for that. I guess my point on it from the beginning was Keller Christ isn't going to separate you from 3 wins and 6 wins. He's just not. That's just not what you're getting. You don't have the offensive line and the running game in front of him for him really to be able to make a difference.
Even though she mocks me, I still read her comments. Kay Thompson on YouTube says the kid at Georgia won 10 games in 2015. That's Grayson Lambert, who had one really good game against South Carolina and Steve Spurrier's last trip to Athens. Everything else was, for the most part, pretty average. But, you can't tell me that Keller Christ on paper is worse than Grayson Lambert was at Virginia, who also lost the starting job. It's one thing to lose the starting job at Stanford to a program that sort of produces quarterbacks every single year. Whoever the quarterback that replaced Grayson Lambert at Virginia was, he wasn't any good either.
Yeah.
And George was able to bring him in and win 10 games with him. And I'm not telling you that Keller Christ would do the same thing at Tennessee, but an average quarterback, when the alternative is nothing, when the alternative is spitting into your hand, an average quarterback is not a bad thing to add to a program.
My only point about this is that we're talking about, let's compare him to Gardner Minshew. Gardner Minshew, I think, becomes a bigger deal because you look at the fact that Jalen Hurts could transfer, and Alabama has their sights set on getting back to national championship contention. Well, if Tua goes down and Jalen transfers, Gardner Minshew's got to be the guy. He's going to have a good offensive line. He's going to have a good running game. He's got one of the best wide receiver cores in the country. I don't think Jeremy Pruitt's judged on the win total next year. So I'd rather have Jared Garantano in the backfield that can move around with an offensive line that might not be very good and a running game that might not be very good.
Last thought for me on this subject, then we'll move on. I think you're trying to apply logic to what is mostly an illogical situation, because it's one thing from the distance of, time to say, Tennessee fans are going to tolerate whatever because, he's dealing with a tough situation right here. But you let loss after loss after loss pile up for not just Tennessee, for any SEC team. Illogic starts to reign, and people start making some accusations and pointing some fingers. And if you're Jeremy Pruitt, you just don't want to deal with that kind of stuff to start your career.
I completely agree. To me, I know that I've said this a million times, but it's not about losing the games, it's how you look in the losses. You couldn't do like Butch. Even in wins last year, Tennessee didn't look very good. When you look at their non-conference games that they're able to win, they're winning by like a field goal against, UMass they played last year. They're getting blown out. The spread was 39 against Alabama, and they lose by like 42. And so that's what Jeremy Pruitt can do. They just have to have a team that doesn't look awful on the field. You can lose the close games.
All right, now back. We're on schedule once again after I screwed up the rundown. I apologize for that. Item number 7 on our SEC Country Line First and 10 list. For me, for my money, the best video department in the SEC continues to be South Carolina. Gamecocks started spring practice this week. They released a cool hype video to sort of commemorate that. And as a little taste of what they're doing there in Columbia, I wanted to show you some of this.
Underclassmen, when you get back in January, all gas, no brakes.
So anyway, you can check out the rest of the video there on the official Gamecocks Twitter account. I think they do a really good job. And there's some excitement here for South Carolina this year, obviously coming off what was the 9-win season from a year ago. They'd like to even add to that in 2018. And, well, Will Muschamp, the South Carolina coach, was sort of asked about that. How does this spring practice help you get to that point where you want to be at the end of 2018? Here's what Muschamp had to say about that.
Well, it's all important. It comes down to how you do on game day. But certainly when you build the foundation of your team, this is where it starts. And each team is different. I told the team when we had a team meeting in January, the 2018 football team starts today. It doesn't start in August when you report to camp. It starts right now. And you've got to continue to build that. And we look at it as in phases of the off-season program is phase 1 and spring practice is phase 2. And we'll worry about the rest of them after spring ball. But right now we've got an opportunity to play the game of football, which when you're in the off-season program, you're in shorts. The football's not there. So there's a lot of guys who look real good in shorts running around. And there'll be a bunch tomorrow and Friday. We'll find out on Saturday. Jonathan Bowers in the comments section. He's a South Carolina fan. He says, all gas, no brakes, Spurs up. He likes what he's hearing there from Will Muschamp. And as a guy who played for Nick Saban in Alabama, how many times did you hear about the phase 1, phase 2?
Oh, my God.
I mean, honestly, I could play audio Kirby Smart saying almost exactly the same thing that Will Muschamp says right there. But the truth is, breaking up the calendar and that kind of stuff, it just sort of works.
No, right? It does. And here's the nature of the beast, under Nick Saban is that, listen, you go through bowl practice, you go to the bowl game, you get done with that, you have like a week or two off, then you get back in for the fourth quarter program. The first thing that you do when you walk in, they hand you a thing, and it's broken down. It's like a playbook, and it's like that thick, and it's broken down into, boy, this is phase 1. These are the workouts. When you go home on your off weekends or when you're on spring break, this is what you should be doing. This is what you should be eating. This is what is going to come next. This is the schedule for the next almost calendar year of what you can expect. And so I think coaches do that so that they have something to fall back on when somebody's like, oh, I wasn't prepared for that. It's like, no, this is phase 1. Right. This is exactly what you should have been prepared for. And I think that's exactly what you hear Will Muschamp kind of in the back of his head saying, this is what we're going to start with. This is where we're trying to go. These are the in-between goals. Chad Clark in the comment section. We had somebody kind of imitate Jim Moore, the former Colts coach, in the comment section earlier. Chad Clark doing his Allen Iverson impersonation. He says, practice? Want to hype up practice? Practice? Can I see some more of that video? Because honestly, I'm not going to apologize for this. A, I think that South Carolina does amazing videos. Yeah. And B, in terms of hyping up practice, did you know how hard it is to practice this time of year? How boring all this kind of stuff is? You're hitting your same, team over and over again. Honestly, I wish every SEC team in the whole league would release a hype video after every single practice, before every single practice. Who couldn't want to watch this football field? Listen, when I was at Alabama, I wish they would have put this on a Jumbotron on the practice field and played videos like this on repeat. I mean, I want you, when it turns to, April in the Deep South, I want you to go lay on your lawn and see how it feels. Because that's what you do. You're stretching, you're laying on the lawn, you're rolling around. Boy, it's hard to get up for things like this. So and Stop the Presses, I actually even like the music of this video, which is just which is way out of character for me, but I actually like it. That's exactly right. All of a sudden, Mike, you're a man full of surprises here today. So I'm hip. Good stuff from South Carolina on that. Let me move on. And by the way, one more comment here before we move on. Maurice Carter says, man, y'all are slacking today. It's like 10 minutes to 4 and you guys are only on topic number 5. Oh, man. That's partially because I went out of order for a while. But here's the thing, though, Maurice and everybody else. Y'all got to realize, my bosses do watch these shows. When y'all put stuff like this in the comment section, all that does is create grief for me somewhere else. Come on, man. How about you keep stuff like that to yourself? Yeah. What, are you trying to get me in trouble, Maurice? Yeah. I had a couple comments about South Carolina that I was going to unleash, but let's wait till a later date because we don't have much time. And we got time. I'm going to start a conversation that probably wouldn't end anytime soon about South Carolina this year. I can't wait for that. I'm not quite as high. I'm not quite as high as other people. Really? On this South Carolina thing. Man, we're in a good mood. We're playing a cool hype video, and all of a sudden you're going to be like the Grinch that stole spring practice. I'm sorry. I had a good comparison, but we'll wait till next week. We'll get into that once this thing starts. Let me do item number 8 instead here on our SEC Country Live first and 10 list. We've talked a lot this week about the Jumbotron at Tennessee, which is probably a pretty silly thing to be talking about, in late February. I guess today it's March the 1st. But listen, this is what we do in the SEC. The slogan, the hashtag, it just means more. This is proved out by the things that we care about. And Vol fans care about the fact that there on that Jumbotron has been Butch Jones' face. Tennessee says this week it's getting ready to take it down, and Mike Griffith, our buddy from SECCountry.com, who covers the Tennessee Vols, has sort of reached out to some folks on Twitter for some ideas about who they wanted to see replace Butch Jones. And he actually got some pretty interesting Twitter responses on this about some people who kind of needed to be. I think that Pat Summitt's kind of an interesting idea on that. Peyton Manning, Reggie White, Eric Berry. Obviously, Berry's a... Reggie's already up there. Isn't he? Reggie on the right side of that thing? I think he was up there. I think it was... I don't have any idea. It was General Nealon and I think Reggie White. Yeah, I think Nealon's in the middle. That may be Reggie White on the other side. You can't put Reggie White on there twice. What I like from somebody who sent Mike a Twitter message that said,
we got to stop putting coaches up there, period. And I think there's an extent to which this is true, not just for Tennessee, but all the SEC. I mean, listen, who we think of as a genius one day, we think very different things 5 minutes from now. So I would imagine a big old blow up of Butch Jones' face is probably pretty expensive. Yeah. That's a pretty big bet to make on a guy that you think is going to be cool enough to your fans to even have up there 2 years from now.
Yeah, no, it was the same way when and I mentioned this to you before the show. When Mike Shula was fired, we had like a mural in the weight room. It was like chronological, back from like 1900 all the way to where you were in like 2007 or whatever it was. And they gave it some time. Mike Shula was fired like December 1st or somewhere along those lines, right after the Iron Bowl or a week after the Iron Bowl. They gave it some time, but when Nick Saban was hired, boy, they had somebody in there with like the wallpaper or whatever it was. You need to put a mural up.
And that thing
was going away. They were making it into Tyrone Prothro all of a sudden. It was no longer Mike Shula. Now it was Tyrone Prothro doing a flip.
So if you look at Mike's Twitter responses, the name that shows up probably more often than anybody else is Peyton Manning. But here's my question, dude.
I like Peyton.
I'm not trying to stir up trouble. But everything we've been sort of told from these leaks is that Manning was a Greg Schiano supporter. After everything that Tennessee went through in the offseason,
they don't care.
That's what I'm asking you.
No.
After everything that just went on during this offseason, Tennessee was the talk of the college football offseason in terms of the response to Greg Schiano. Can you then put on the Jumbotron the face of the guy who advocated for Schiano the most?
Peyton Manning is so much more to Tennessee than a Greg Schiano supporter. I mean, he's the greatest quarterback in the history of that school, probably. I mean, he was a part of so much of the Tennessee history. He still carries the Tennessee flag, still goes back and talks to the team. I'm not gonna chain lock this guy or lock him down to being a Greg Schiano supporter. I think he was just trying to do what he thought was right and trying to be right by his friends. Peyton Manning should be the one on this court. I love Pat Summitt, by the way. That's a great one. But, she's a basketball coach.
Yeah,
put her on the rim.
There's actually a venue in which they play. All right, item number 9 here in our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Thought that Ben Kirchhoff over at CBSSports.com had an interesting look at the quarterback competition that's going to go on between Jalen Hurts and Tua Tagovailoa this upcoming spring. And 2 things that I take away from this that I kind of want to talk to you about. The challenge here to Jalen Hurts, if you read between the lines, is to be more aggressive with the throws you make, either because of his own sort of timid decision-making or because Alabama sort of handcuffed him in terms of only make safe throws. I think for Jalen Hurts, in terms of stepping up, earning this job, beating out Tua Tagovailoa again, that to me is the most crucial issue. You got to be more than just the guy who runs jet sweeps. You got to make tough throws. And you know what? I can live with an interception from Alabama because I got a great defense. Let me see a quarterback that can make throws. Because the reason why I like Tua more so than Jalen Hurts is not because he avoids mistakes, it's because he can make throws. I want to see this spring what Hurts can do in terms of making throws. I'll live with some mistakes to see some big throws.
I think that's a fair assessment. I think that if you look at Jalen's game, you say, boy, he needs to let it rip a little bit more. And I think the problem comes down to practice though, because guess what is going to get Jalen Hurts less reps in this quarterback competition? If he goes out there and throws picks.
I mean that's dumb.
Your defense can be as good as you want it to be, but guess what? If that corner is taking up that route and then all of a sudden sprinting the other way and putting 7 on the board before your defense gets on the field, that's going to be an issue. It's never the way Nick Saban has operated, and I know I'm in the same boat. I look back at what Jalen Hurts was last year, and you pick it apart. But in the end, I think Nick Saban's plan worked. I think you found yourself in a position to win at the end of the year, and you win a national title game. For all the questions you have about the offense and them being safe, boy, it tended to work in the end. So I don't want to pick it apart on a play-by-play level.
I think that he's got such a good defense, Saban, that you ought to encourage your quarterbacks to sort of stretch the field a little bit. I mean, honestly, I'm a Sam Darnold guy, Darnold, however you pronounce his last name, from USC. A guy that threw some interceptions, but also had the courage to throw the ball into a tight window. That's what I want my quarterback to do, especially if I got a team like Alabama that's got a great defense. And by the way, I said the same thing about Georgia as well, my own team. Fromm and Fields, 2 quarterbacks, I don't care about them throwing interceptions. Will you make some big throws for me, though?
I see it the wrong way. I mean, USC, I love Sam Darnold. Guess where they were at the end of the year? They weren't in the college football playoff. And so I think Nick says, listen, we're going to get enough opportunities. And I think it has to be somewhere in between. I think that Brian Dable handcuffed him a little bit. I think that Jalen and Lane Kiffin was letting some of those deep balls go. I mean, he was a little bit better 2 years ago in that offense than he was under Brian Dable. So I think you have to find the intermediate. I just don't think letting it rip into traffic is going to be what Jalen Hurts is on his docket.
All right, item number 10 here in our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And I have a very simple question I want to ask you. Let me set the story up here, though. We kind of joked about UCF yesterday in terms of them claiming national championships. And one of the things they want to do is get like official state of Florida license plates that say UCF national champions on them. I guess, though, this is running into a little bit of trouble here. The Orlando Sentinel had a report on this, that a bill that would have created such a play, backing the Knights' claim to a national football title, is changed in committee on Monday. Instead of mandating that wording, it now allows state officials to consult with UCF leaders about whether to include that language on the play. I have no idea what this means, but the Orlando Sentinel story seems to think that there's a chance now this doesn't happen. But there's also the insinuation that Florida alumni in the voting body here might vote for this as a way of trolling against Alabama. But do you think that's really the case? If you're a legislator who's a Florida alumnus, are you voting for the UCF national title plate?
No.
I think you're voting against that, right?
I think you're voting it down. Listen, UCF, I don't know if a lot of people realize, UCF is an absolutely massive university. I mean,
they've got like 50,000.
50,000. Alumni base is huge, so they're going to have backing in some places to get this license plate done.
It's essentially the 13th grade if you grew up in Central Florida.
It's an absolutely, and South Florida is the same way. South Florida is a huge university down in St. Pete or Tampa or whatever South Florida's at. So I think they're going to have the backing, but I don't think this has anything to do with some kind of, let's nitpick at other people. I think they just genuinely want to be proud of something. And I don't think UCF is given a fair shake each year to make a run at a national title.
But if you're a Florida legislator, you got to block this, right? You can't let somebody in your state, and I would say Florida State, but this is an SEC show. You can't let somebody in your state start making national championship claims.
I don't think, listen, I love the legislators down there. I'm from Florida. I don't think it even registers. I don't even think they know who Dan Mullen is, half the legislators down in Florida. They don't have a clue.
Well, anyway, here in SEC Country Live, we're always glad to have you with us. If you missed a portion of our show today, we'd love to have you check out our podcast. It's there for you on Apple Podcasts. We'll put it up for you on iTunes, SoundCloud, the whole deal there. And of course here, we like to close out the show the same way every day. We're always looking for champions of life. And today I thought this was kind of funny. Kind of a tie-in to the SEC here, because there's been a lot of talk in college basketball lately about, the future of the sport and should it be a feeder system to the NBA. And it's sort of easy to forget, how things are different now, how much different they are than what they used to be. There was a time when great players stayed in college for at least 3 years, if not all 4 years. That almost never happens anymore. And a reminder of that is Karl Anthony Towns, the current Minnesota Timberwolf, former Kentucky Wildcat, who tweeted out, this is, I think, really funny. He says, "It's been a long time coming, my brothers. Senior night is finally upon us. Hashtag Big Blue Nation." That's Karl Anthony Towns. That's the kid that plays for the Suns. Michael probably knows better than me who all's in this picture. Who all's in this picture? Yeah. So Booker's the kid for the Suns, and Ulis and Lyles. It's hard to believe that if these guys had stayed, they'd still be eligible in college.
Oh, there's a whole roster of them. If you look at the last few years, and I can't remember where I saw that, but it's incredible the amount of talent they would have had on the roster the year if people would have stayed longer than just their freshman year.
So pretty good for KAT.
Yeah, no, I love it. I absolutely love it. Listen, and everybody on the YouTube thing is telling you to quit beefing down, and
I can't believe that I'm the only one that's heard that phrase. I didn't make it up. I'd give anything if I was that.
I don't think we've got anybody on here that actually had ever heard that before.
Well, if you're on YouTube, thanks for watching the show. We'd appreciate you sharing it with whoever it goes to on YouTube. If you're on Facebook, share it with your friends there as well. It's just a help to us. We love talking to the SEC with you, and we love it when you share the show with other people. We'll take the weekend off here. Be back again on Monday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time for another episode of SEC Country Live. Y'all have a great weekend, and we'll see you then.